The basic design of ships and big boats hasn't changed all that much in 500 years. But some ships never get to live up to their full potential. Sometimes they were years ahead of their time, and in other cases, they were no longer required by the time they were built. Others were just plain unlucky and became victims of strange circumstances. Join us as we tell you the tales of the most unlucky ships in all of history. According to ancient maritime tradition, bringing a woman on board a ship used to bring bad luck to its sailors. When Captain Simon Reed brought his new bride Annetta on board the Lady Lovibond in 1748, the crew believed he'd condemned them all to an untimely fate. The schooner was only sailing in celebration of Reed's marriage because he wanted to celebrate the occasion with a cruise, but it ended in disaster. Some reports say that the ship's first mate, John Rivers, who was also in love with Annette, flew into a jealous rage and deliberately wrecked the ship on Goodwin Sands. Ever since then, sailors have reported sightings of the Lady Lovibond as a ghost ship, drifting in the waters close to the place she is wrecked. A report from Captain James Westlake of the Edenbridge states that he was so convinced he'd seen a real ship in 1848 that he dispatched a rescue party to assist it, only to find nothing there when they grew closer. She was allegedly spotted again in 1948, giving off an eerie white glow. Sailors can be a superstitious bunch, and so it's no surprise that many German Navy officers believed that the battleship Scharnhorst was cursed. She was supposed to be the pride of the German fleet, capable of outrunning British forces and equipped with the latest electronic technology to give her an edge in combat. From the beginning, though, things went wrong. During construction, she rolled over onto her side and crushed the men working on her, injuring hundreds. Getting her back the right way up took 3 months. She launched herself a day before her official launch party by breaking free of her moorings, crushing 2 barges on the way out. During her first battle, one of her guns exploded, doing more damage to her own side than the enemy. Attempting to come home via the Elbe River, her radar failed and she collided with the enormous ocean liner Bremen, sinking the passenger ship. Finally, she turned directly into the line of British fire during her next major engagement and was lost below the waves. The Swedish warship Mars was another vessel that was supposed to be the pride of its country's naval fleet. Just like the Scharnhorst, though, it appeared that it was jinxed. The Mars was also known as the Makelos, which translates as peerless or outstanding, and it must have been quite the thing to look at. Completed in 1564, it was to be the lead ship of King Eric XIV of Sweden's fleet, measuring 200 feet long and packed with 107 separate guns, making it the largest gunship of its era. Regrettably, it would seem that nobody had given consideration to what would happen in the event of a fire, with so much gunpowder on board. The ship didn't even last a year. It had been built to give out cannon fire, but had no defense against it. Struck by flame during the First Battle of Åland, the gunpowder ignited and the boat exploded. The wreckage wasn't located until 2011. Most of the ships on our list have been retired from active service. That isn't the case for Admiral Kuznetsov, which has been on duty since 1995 and is currently undergoing repairs before the next reluctant crew boards the cursed vessel. It didn't start life well. It was completed in 1991, but was the subject of a dispute between the Russians and the Ukrainians over who owned it, and so it didn't move for 4 years. It was then almost lost in a storm during its first year on the water due to a power failure and spent 3 years being repaired. In 2000, it was part of the Kursk tragedy, taking part in the training exercises which saw the submarine sank. By 2001, it was back in for repairs and stayed there for several years. During 2016, 2 Russian planes crashed while attempting to land on the aircraft carrier because of failures of the ship's arresting wire. When it returned to the Russian dry dock PD-50 for further repairs in 2018, PD-50 sank due to flooding brought on by an electrical failure. It's currently scheduled to go back out to sea in 2021. It probably shouldn't. Ask any sailor, and they'll tell you that changing the name of a vessel after it's already been established will only ever end in tears. That might account for why the Mikasa sailed perfectly well for 39 years after launching from Glasgow in 1888, and then sank within a year of being renamed as the Manaslu. The ship was sailing on Lake Ontario in 1928 when it ran into a storm. Despite the adverse weather, it should have been able to cope easily, but it slipped below the waves. No cause was ever found, but experts have speculated that the heavy cargo of 116 cattle may have panicked and moved around rapidly, causing the ship to tip over. The wreck was finally located 200 feet below the surface of the lake in 2018, still in remarkably good condition, save for damage at the stern, where she struck the lake's bottom. A 1927 Chevrolet Coupe has stayed on board the boat for all these years, keeping it company. Our stories begin with a ship that was designed by the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who was the architect of many of Britain's finest railways. There was seemingly nothing Brunel's ingenious mind couldn't design, and so he was also involved in shipbuilding. His third ship was the Great Eastern, which was a vast iron ship powered by steam. Sadly for Brunel and his creation, he was too far ahead of the times. The 693-foot-long vessel was simply too big to dock in most major ports. It was cursed by bad luck before it even set sail. Brunel suffered a stroke shortly before its maiden voyage and passed away before it completed its journey. Although Great Eastern was perfectly safe, it rolled a lot during heavy wind, which rendered many passengers and sailors sick. Finally, after only 30 years in service, it was broken up in 1888, sold for scrap at a fraction of its cost. If the USA had an answer to the Admiral Kuznetsov, it was the destroyer William D. Porter, known to those in the U.S. Navy as Willie D. She launched in 1942 and successfully completed shakedown operations, but things didn't take long to go awry. Launching to rendezvous with the battleship Iowa in 1943, her anchor tore off the lifeboat mounts and railings from her sister ship, which was docked next to her. Upon meeting the Iowa, which had President Franklin D. Roosevelt on board, a depth charge accidentally fell from the William D. Porter's deck and exploded in the sea, causing the entire party to take evasive action on the assumption they were under attack from U-boats. The following day, her boiler failed, and she fell out of formation. A mere day after that, during an anti-aircraft drill, a live torpedo from aboard the Willie D. was accidentally launched directly at the Iowa, forcing the ship to break radio silence to report the danger. The torpedo missed by 3,000 yards. 3 years later, Willie D. managed to avoid a kamikaze dive bomber by meters, only to have the boat float below the ship and explode anyway, sinking her off the coast of Okinawa. The Mary Celeste is one of the best-known sailing mysteries of all time. We know where she launched from and where she ended up, but what happened on her final voyage is a mystery that nobody will ever be able to resolve. On December 5, 1872, the Mary Celeste was found floating adrift without her crew, close to the Azores Islands. Her lifeboat was missing, but she was undamaged, fully stocked, and still has the personal effects of all her crew on board. Her original name was Amazon, and she only became the Mary Celeste in 1868 when she was sold into American ownership. Perhaps the change of name doomed her? What fewer people know is that she continued in service after she was salvaged, and was again involved in a strange incident. In 1885, she was deliberately wrecked by her captain in an attempt to fraudulently claim an insurance payout. By then, nobody wanted her. 3 separate captains had passed away young while in command of the vessel, and she was known all around the world as being cursed. We have to salute the French for their commitment to the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle. She nearly never launched at all. The hull was laid down at 1989, but a recession in France led to construction being halted, completed the following year, again in 1991, again in 1993, and a 4th time in 2001. By the time she was finally commissioned in 2001, she was 5 years behind schedule and had cost over $3 billion. It was 2 years after her first sea trials revealed that the flight deck had to be extended to accommodate the E-2C Hawkeye aircraft, costing a further $5 million. The following year, trials of her nuclear reactor combusted some of the isolation elements, requiring further repair, and during her final sea trial, the port propeller shattered. Further investigations revealed that it had a structural issue, which was also present in the ship's other propeller. Propellers from older ships were fitted, reducing her top speed significantly, but she was called back in for a refit after rattling noises close to the starboard propeller reached 100 decibels. Since then, she suffered a radiation leak in 2002, a reactor core burnout in 2006, a year of repairs between 2008 and 2009, and a propulsion failure in 2010. More recently, she spent 18 months getting refitted between 2018 and 2019. We're not surprised the French have decided to go with a different design for the next aircraft carrier. The German battleship Tirpitz was constructed to intimidate Allied navies and win the war at sea for Hitler. That's not quite how things ended up for the afflicted vessel. When it was first built, it was the sister ship of the famous Bismarck, but weighed 2,000 tons heavier, making her the heaviest warship ever built in Europe. She was intended to direct her fire at the enemy, but ended up attracting plenty of it herself. It caught fire accidentally on no less than 3 occasions, once because of a stray cigarette butt, once because of a faulty projector, and a third time for unknown reasons. The massive ship was also an obvious target for enemy aircraft, and so was constantly under attack and having to perform defensive maneuvers out at sea. Because of that, it only ever fired its weapons once in anger before being sunk in 1944, a mere 3 years after it was commissioned. No set of cursed boat stories should be considered complete without a trip to the Bermuda Triangle. The mysterious phenomenon has long been blamed for the disappearance of the steamer SS Cotopaxi in December 1925, which vanished on the way from South Carolina to Cuba. It should have been a routine trip, but her captain, W.G. Meyer, sent out a distress call on November 29, 1925, stating that the ship was listing and taking on water, without any explanation as to why. She was never seen or heard of again. Or was she? There were tales in 2018 that the ship had mysteriously reappeared close to Cuba 90 years after vanishing, rusted and crewless in the waters. The stories appeared to be confirmed by officials, and then suddenly denied and dismissed as a hoax. Was this a simple mistake? Or could they be hiding information regarding the mysterious triangle? How else could we finish our list but with the story of the Titanic? Everybody knows the legend, and almost everybody has seen the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. The greatest, most prestigious, and most luxurious ship ever built at the time of its launch sailed from Southampton, England in 1912. It never made it to New York. The massive vessel, which had been fitted with revolutionary, new watertight bulkheads, was publicly described as being unsinkable. Nobody should ever tempt fate by describing a ship as unsinkable. As it turned out, the Titanic did have one singular vulnerability. It couldn't withstand a heavy collision with an enormous iceberg. Many things came together to doom the ship that night. A radio warning about the ice fields from a passing ship was ignored. The ship's captain failed to reduce his speed when warned of the iceberg, and a planned lifeboat drill reduced the effectiveness of the evacuation. Now, over a century later, the most famous ship in human history is one that sank on its maiden voyage. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.